Okay, so continuing on with growth boundaries. So I'll do a quick review of chapter 3 from Porter. Let's see here. Where is my... So the file says Kelly, but it's actually Porter. Key notes here. Oh, excuse me. Excuse me. Okay. So the interesting thing about this article is that it does a quick review of the history of urban growth, not just in the US, but all over the world. So you see this first few paragraphs, especially this section here on forces of change. And let's see here. This is citing here. Just highlight it for the video. The need for greater public guidance over development. For stimulating urban development in the United States and elsewhere. During long evolution of human settlement, people clustered in cities and towns within walking distance or a brief horse ride of each other. So their mutual proximity made it possible to trade goods and services, manufacture products, participate in religious rites, attend schools, enjoy entertainment, etc. And then people lived and worked close together, and urban centers were dense to afford maximum accessibility among all these activities. So this is before the steam engine, before the car, people were walking and riding horses to get from one end of the city to the other. Then we have from the 1850s onwards, we had the horses and then the electric trolleys, and then eventually also the railways. And then beginning of the 1900s, we also had the automobile. And then the result of the sort of popularity and dependence on the automobile sort of taking over the railway. While the railway was still popular, historians and urban sort of analysts like Porter over here concluded that railway is still good because you can transport a lot of people, but it's really the automobile, especially in the US, which had a very significant negative impact on urbanization. So the result of the popularity of the automobile was unprecedented sprawl. And again, we define sprawl as rapid urbanization over a short period of time, usually single use. And then I'll just show that on the screen real quick. And then the reason why I'm repeating it over and over again, because very likely this will come up in our exam. And then as of a few study by Angel et al. Said that urban sprawl technically can also describe it as a rate of growth of urban populations. Urban sprawl, you can describe that as an area experiencing a rate of urbanization that is higher than the rate of population growth. So in this study by Angel et al., they observed that the average rate of growth for urban populations was 1.6%. But in areas that experience urban sprawl, land use was 3.66% annually. So that's that's more than twice. So the population is growing at a, let's say, fixed rate, but urban land use, urbanization is growing at 3.6. So 1.6 to 3.6. So it's more than double. So you can see a lot of development when the population isn't even that big. So that's the key thing here or like one of the latest sort of characteristics of urban sprawl. Other characteristics include low density residential housing and single use zoning, and also the reliance of a private automobile. Okay, let's continue on. Okay, so how does Porter describe urban sprawl? So especially after World War II, when cars were plentiful, federally backed home mortgages were available and the economy was on the move. By the 1980s, basically this first section here talks about the rapid growth in America after World War II. So a lot of economic activities, a lot of income, which resulted in a lot of demand for new housing, even though it might not have been the best sort of housing design for several communities across America. By the 1890s and the 1900s, suburbia was a way of life for many Americans, and rural living was on the increase. So basically, this says that they were growing outwards, almost at a uncontrolled rate. These changes in metropolitan development patterns have been studied by urban planners and urban geographers concerned with defining the optimum or the most efficient form of urbanization. So the relative benefits of various patterns of city and regional development. So these interests surface in evaluations of potential models of metropolitan development, such as those postulated in regional transportation studies. So these models are used as shorthand ways to describe changing patterns of city growth. So the suburban edge cities recently identified and analyzed by Joel Garreau in his study, which I will, okay, it's not listed here. For example, are an attempt to explain emerging growth patterns in metropolitan development. So these are talking about the urban growth models. I have a few slides over here. Sort of to supplement this description. Okay. So around this time, like 1930s to 1950s, there were three popular models for urban growth. So we have the concentric model, the sector model, and the multiple nuclei model. And they each are described here. So the traditionally, I'll just move it a bit to the side. The traditional centrally oriented urban area was with a strong downtown core, is one of the kind of forms described here in Porter Chapter 3. So distinct industrial uses surrounded the urban core, and then it also was characterized by gradually less dense residential neighborhoods in the outer band. So, oops, sorry. So that's this figure here, where it's basically a series of concentric circles. So you have an urban core here in yellow, and then zone of transition, basically a transportation corridor, and then zone of independent workers' home. So these are the low-cost housing. So it's low cost, but it's close to where they work, the urban core. And then you have the zone of better residences, basically middle to high income housing. They have larger plots of land. And then outside of that is the commuter zone where people commute from other cities. Okay. So it's here, let's see. So gradually less dense residential neighborhoods in the outer band. So so you have the highly dense, low income housing, and then the less dense, high income housing. And then there is a distinct rural edge. This is what we call this is what is described as the commuter zone in this diagram here. And then decentralized or concentric circle form of development. So this is the first form. The second form is the sector model, a more accurate description of most cities' development patterns formulated by Homer Hoyt, a land economist who defines sectors as specific land uses radiating from the city center. So if in the sectoral model, you have again, the urban core in yellow, then you have the high rent residential uses here on the east next to the what they call the education and recreation zone. Sorry, my right eye is really hurting. I don't know why. And then we have the sort of transportation corridor over here connecting other cities to this city. And then we have the industrial area next to the transportation corridor or the transportation sector. And then you have the low-cost housing next to the transportation and the industrial sectors. Let's see. I have another diagram here. I just remembered. It's AR 3133. see stakeholders or hierarchy. I just want to show that diagram real quick. Discussions. Sorry, I can't find it. Anyway, so that's the second urban form, or like a description of um, urban form. The third one is the satellite city model. That postulates development of a series of distinct towns or cities interlinked with the central city but separated from each other, and the central city by a green belt of rural land. So if you see here, that green belt of rural land is not so much seen in this diagram, but you can see the different sort of nuclei. So we have here in yellow the original central business district, and then in blue, in sort of brown here, we have an outlying business district. I don't know what's going on with my right eye. Anyway, so just ignore my face. Let's see here. And then we have middle class residential in between the original business district and the new or the satellite business district. And then to the left, we have the low class residential closer to the original CBD, and then the high class residential closer to the new CBD. And then in dark blue, we have sort of the beginnings of sprawl with the residential suburb just outside the, what they call this, high cost or high class residential area. So sort of what's happening, similar to what's happening here in Cebu, where I'll just pull up a Cebu city map again. So in Cebu City, we have the original sort of historic CBD here in the Heritage District. And then we have the sort of original low-cost residential housing. So you can see if you zoom around in Google Maps, you can see these like small roofs. These are very tightly clustered or tightly built low-cost housing because they can't afford larger plots of land. And then if you go further north, you would see the new business district, like represented by Ayala Center Cebu and also IT Park. And if you go up further here northeast, you can see the quality of housing becomes more expensive as well. So not so much here in the Gaisano Country Mall area, but if you move further closer to Banilad, you can see these are the new residential sort of suburbs. Not as, what they call this, large as the US suburbs, which is most likely a good thing because they're still maximizing land use because it's not so sprawling yet. But you have houses that look like this as well, where it's one big driveway, you have a mansion, a pool. So this is an example of, I guess, large plots of land, single use, low density. So this is just one family. So that's classified as sprawl. Not to say that it should be illegal to have buildings like this or land use like this, but it should be at the very least regulated. And if you go further north, you can see some similar developments. So up here you have some more apartments. I think these belong to, if I'm not mistaken, Maria Luisa subdivision. So the entrance should be somewhere, where am I? I'll just entrance is here. If you follow this road, it goes up into the mountains. And I think there's something wrong with my, here we go. If I do 3D here, you can see this subdivision is developing way upland. So not only reducing the upland's ability to absorb rainwater runoff, but also um, indirectly reducing the quality of rivers as well, because this area is supposed to um, be it's not yet protected land, but up here definitely we're nearing protected lands. You can see large parcels of land being sort of developed, and then usually in Cebu, the waste material is not properly disposed, and sometimes it's just thrown into the nearby rivers, or what we call sapa. So if I turn off, switch to default view, we can't really see the rivers as much. Let's see. Let's turn on terrain. Still not very visible, but where you have valleys, that usually connects to rivers. But anyway, let's continue. So satellite city and multinodal cities are kind of close. Multinodal is the newer sort of definition for that. So the newer multinodal urban pattern that consists of traditional center, the CBD, supplemented by a series of outer concentrations of commercial and industrial development, some of which may be more significant than the center, with no distinct rural edge, the typical metropolitan city of the day. So if you look at Cebu, you can't really tell where Cebu ends, and just continuing to develop into the um, upland areas. Meanwhile, the historic center has sort of been forgotten by the city, which is why it's a good thing that there are a few developments in this area, sort of bringing back the importance of the historic sites, and maybe also create new jobs and new sort of better urban environments in this historic center of Cebu. Okay, continuing on. So that's the main point I want to highlight for this part of Porter chapter 4. Then the next part here would be um, the case for and against compact urban development. So I think this is very interesting. So it gives you sort of the two sides for developing compact and just like developing free market with no regulations. So I'll just quickly go through this. Here we go. So for many people concerned with the quality of urban life, the continuing outward explosion of urban growth poses some troublesome concerns. So the traditional tight-knit fabric of urban living has given way to greater physical and, some believe, social separation between individuals, families, and groups, lending support to the us and them outlooks. So according to Porter, that's happening in the US. Some authors might disagree. So similar physical separations have taken place between locations central to daily living, such as residences, shopping, working places, requiring travel that takes time and energy. Thus, while the automobile may provide many people with more choices and opportunities for where and how to live and work, those choices have social and economic costs that some people cannot afford. So another major issue is that the spread of developing and developed areas occupies more land. I just want to highlight that otherwise might have been left available for farming, forest, and scenic open space, or protected from disruption or destruction of environmentally sensitive resources. Development on the edges of metropolitan areas across the nation is consuming 2 or 3 times as much acreage per household as was the case in earlier decades. So this section of Porter was written. Let me just check the syllabus real quick. So assuming this is the correct document, Let's see, when is this supposed to be? Oh, wait, I have it over here. So Porter wrote his book in 1997. And then we have the research from 2010. I'll just close these other PowerPoints that give us sort of a similar description of land use and population growth. So population at 1.6, but urban land use at 3.66 growth rate per year. And then if we go to Porter over here, he also says the same thing way back 1997. Over here, the development on the edges of metropolitan areas across the nation is consuming uh, 2 or 3 times more than the average household population. And it was also the case in earlier decades. Apparently, if we go through the readings, I think this was even happening 1940s, several decades before Porter published his book. So people living in urban areas must travel longer and longer distances to reach the open countryside. The dependence on on automobile travel for almost every function of daily living aggravates both traffic congestion and air quality throughout the region. So this is Porter talking about the U.S. way back 1997, and already we're feeling similar kind of effects in Cebu City today. So the trend towards scattered development dependent on automobiles raises 2 more quantifiable concerns. The first one is the cost of expanding infrastructure systems that provide the necessities for daily living. So this includes the roads, highways, water, sewer lines, schools, libraries, telephone lines, etc. So all of this, I think we can all agree, costs the local government and the city money. And then who pays for that extra development? Usually it's shouldered by everyone in the city, but the only people who benefit from the new extension of infrastructure are those who live in those new subdivisions, which kind of creates a inequity or a what they call this inefficiency in resource management. So we're paying for new infrastructure, but we, meaning the entire of Cebu City, is paying for new infrastructure, but only a select few can take advantage of it. That's why we mentioned last week that impact fees may be the way to sort of balance that inequality or equity issue, so that the citizens of that city pay less, and the people who will use that development, especially the people who propose that development, should be the ones to pay for that new infrastructure. Okay. These costs tend to increase for each unit development as densities of development decrease. Furthermore, as people move out of settled areas to new ones, they leave behind major investments in infrastructure that cannot be properly maintained by the remaining populations. I'll zoom out. There's a this is another reason why I'm going back to this reading, because it's very clearly happening in Cebu today. So let's go back pre-war Cebu, like 1930s, 1920s. A lot of resources was put forth or used to create this district, this original CBD here. And then when we experienced population boom and economic growth after the war, because the Philippines was an ally of the US, we also experienced some growth. Growth occurred all the way up into the Talamban area to the north and down to, let's say, Talisay to the south, Tabunok, if you see here on the map, Pardo, Tabunok. So we have a lot of new infrastructure, new housing, and meanwhile, people tend to move out of the heritage center, which means this also incurs a cost. So this is a waste of resources that currently is not being utilized. So there are now plans to sort of revitalize, reinvigorate the heritage core. So this is, for me, very impactful because this was written 1997 and we're seeing it happen today, 2023 in Cebu City. Okay, next. I'm just going very slowly because it's very important. If you don't, if you forget everything from this class, at least remember this article from Porter. Okay. So city planners long have maintained that compact development saves capital and operating costs for infrastructure systems. A major study of these factors was commissioned way back 1970s by the U.S. Department of Housing and Development. Uh, that's the first group. The Council on Environmental Quality, that's the second group, and the Environmental Protection Agency. The study called The Cost of Sprawl. This study is also will be sort of discussed in other readings. Remains the principal study supporting the concept that sprawl costs more to serve by urban systems than compact development. So although its methodology for this study has been criticized, the research found that low-density development required more extensive and therefore more costly infrastructure systems than higher density development. So that's the key finding here. So they want compact. Other analysis, including one by the National Association of Home Builders, found similar results. So in 1989, in the 1989 summary of the cost of sprawl studies, James E. Frank concluded that capital costs of streets, sewers, water, storm drainage, and schools for a typical subdivision of 3 houses per acre. What is an acre in square kilometers? Acres to square kilometers. Let's just say square meter then. So 1 acre is 4,000 square meters. So 3 houses per 4,000 square meters. So you can already visualize that. What is 4,000 square meters? Most subdivisions I've seen here in Cebu, 1 house is about, let's see, I think this current lot I'm on is about like 300, maybe. It's like 15 by 10. No, not even. So this house, like, this is 20. The front is like 15. Let's say 20 by 15. That's already big. That's 300 square meters for 1 house. They're looking at 3 houses for 4,000 square meters. So that's the 3 divided by 4,000 square meters divided by 3. So I just want to give this clear picture. Oops, sorry. 4,000 divided by 3. What the heck is going on with my mouse? 4,000 divided by 3. So that's 1,300 square meters for 1 house. It's a very big land use. Okay. So again, going back here, for any typical subdivision where you have 3 houses per acre or 3 houses per 4,000 square meters, can be reduced by at least 1/3. Basically, the cost, you can save 1/3 by developing near basic public facilities and employment centers at densities of 12 houses per acre, 12 houses per 4,000 square meters. So instead of 1 house being only at 1,000, 1 house at 1,300 square meters, now you will have 4,000 divided by 12. So that's more or less what's happening here, at least in my subdivision. I have about, the houses here about 300 square meters per lot of the house. So I guess we're already applying some of these sort of compact development, but maybe it could be improved further. So most of such studies assume that all development will be served by urban type facilities. So much rural development, however, relies on unimproved roads, water wells, and septic tanks rather than more expensive facilities. So those private infrastructure costs plus the lower land costs typically found in outlying locations have not been factored into the studies cited above. So this could be one thing why, at least in the US, people still follow an urban sprawl type of development. Sorry, excuse me. Okay. Nevertheless, several factors tend to affect such cost savings. So the cost saving of many non-private facilities such as schools, fire stations, police protection, and road maintenance are increased by scattered development. Initial low-cost infrastructure in low-density areas must be replaced at substantial cost when more intensive urban development occurs in the area. And then the dependence of scattered development on wells and septic tanks almost inevitably leads to long-term maintenance problems and potential impacts on water quality. So even though developers might be incentivized to develop on green fields outside of the urban core because it's cheaper and they don't really develop the road, in the long term, there are a lot of additional costs that could be saved if we just built in a compact pattern or compact form. The upshot of all analysis to date is that the fiscal case or the monetary case for or against compact development still remains unclear even by 1997. So recent research by Robert Burchell and Paul Tischler, two of the nation's preeminent specialists in fiscal studies, concluded that sprawl development increases some infrastructure costs by relatively small amounts, about 25% for local roads, 15% for water and sewer systems, 5% and 5% for schools. Local road improvement costs, however, are often funded by developers. Water and sewer costs are often funded by raising water. Here's the study. The next page, water rates. However, other evidence suggests that sprawl development may impact important environmental qualities and generate longer commuter travel. The most conclusive test may be Americans increasing concern over the amount of open space and environmentally sensitive land being consumed by development. Here in Cebu City, I don't think the general populace is overly concerned of the new developments yet. In fact, I think the general population is still very much obsessed with, not really obsessed, but dependent on automobile travel. So that could be a big challenge for Cebu City. So these concerns have led many communities to adopt strategies for directing growth to certain areas and discouraging it in others, and for encouraging more concentrated, continuous development that can be efficiently served by infrastructure systems and is less consumptive. To assist in limiting the outward march of growth, communities also focus more attention on retaining and improving existing developed areas. So again, what do you call this? Reinvigorating or reestablishing the historic urban cores should be a solution that Cebu City and maybe other cities and municipalities in the Philippines should consider. Okay, now here, the section, let's see. Do we need to go through this? Okay, there are a few points here. I think I'll just skip to the next point here on establishing boundaries. So I'll just choose the most important ones. Okay, sorry. So the concept of drawing a line around a developing community within which all urban development will take place is appealing in its simplicity and directness. So it is highly sellable to voters, upset by growth, and to environmentalists concerned with protecting rural areas from suburban sprawl. So a boundary suggests order, organization, etc. Nevertheless, boundaries present complex technical, political, and legal issues that can generate controversies and conflicts. All these issues come to play in the act of establishing and maintaining a boundary. So the technical problem is defining a rationale for drawing the boundary line. So not more difficult than depicting a comprehensive land map, but more potent in its implications. So with a comprehensive land use plan, according to Porter, you can identify like key areas, etc. But with a growth boundary, you can actually limit development. So you're just concentrating development in one area. So if the boundary is to designate the area within which a jurisdiction intends to deliver urban services, the potential extent of major systems must be determined. So this analysis will include projections of expected types of development and judgments about standards or levels of service and most efficient areas for delivering those services. Sewer and water lines, for example, are most easily and inexpensively extended throughout a watershed. Major roads must link to the regional road network, and other service areas will be constrained by geographic features or jurisdictional limits. The regional urban growth boundaries established by both Portland and Oregon as examples were largely based on existing and projected service areas for the metropolitan sewer systems, which effectively identified the areas expected to undergo urban development. So this could be one approach. Like, how will the policy and the programs for a Cebu city or a Philippine city or municipality growth boundary plan, how will it be sort of conceived? So maybe the issue is, how do you get those studies started? Like, who is the experts that will calculate how much sewer systems we need, how much water systems we need? I guess we need to cooperate with the like chemical engineers, civil engineers, and maybe a few, I don't know what's the term, like geodetic, maybe water experts, water management experts, both for natural rain, drainage systems, deep wells, and similar sort of water resources. That could be the first step in Cebu City, and maybe in your municipality and local community you have something similar, like who manages water and who manages waste. So those are, I think, for me in the Philippines, the two big issues. Another approach to defining boundaries is determining the amount of land area that will be required for anticipated future development and the specific areas in which development should be encouraged. Usually, planning agencies will project land area required to accommodate about 20 years growth. So that's your target. I think in Cebu, we're also doing, in the Philippines, we're doing something similar. So let me just double check. Philippine Development Plan 2023. So that's 2023 to 2028. So that's only 5 years. So the challenge here is, in the Philippines, presidency, or like the national government, the president can only be the president for 6 years. That is not the same as 20-year growth plan. So the growth plan or the boundary plan must be what they call this, attractive enough politically to sustain interest for, let's see, what's 20 divided by 6, yeah, for 3 presidencies. So we have to make sure, so we need a group of people, maybe an NGO, maybe a public-private partnership that sort of holds the, what they call this, or guides the local government for national government is 6 years, so we need to hold the national government accountable for 3 terms. And then for local government, that's the mayor. The mayor only has 3 years. So that's, let's see, 20 divided by 3. So we need to account for 6 mayors. So just thinking about that already makes you feel a bit, what do you call this? Challenge, I guess, is a good way to put it. So you need to think about 6 mayors and 3 presidents, or at the very least, if you're like proposing this plan or comprehensive land use plan at the local level, 6 mayoral terms. So periodic boundary revisions are supposed to maintain that 20-year supply of land within the boundary. Several types of estimates are necessary to determine future land needs. So these are also, expect these to come out in the exam. So what are these estimates? Projections of future increases in specific types and densities of land uses, judgments about expected redevelopment and more intensive development of underutilized land that might reduce the needs for sorry, that might reduce needs for use of undeveloped land. So basically, again, going for compact. Determinations of appropriate directions of urban expansion based on infrastructure systems, environmental factors, land ownership patterns, and other considerations. And then finally, considerations for jurisdictional boundaries, annexation policies, and possibilities and other political constraints. So these are more on the, what they call that, the boundary of your city. So when you create a growth boundary plan, you need to coordinate not just at the, what do you call this, city or municipal level. You also need to think about the, in the Philippine case, the provincial level. We don't need to worry so much about the regional level, but that's still a big factor because we have a region seven, what's it called this, physical development plan. Okay. There was one here. I can't find it. Prepare it beforehand. But one key thing for the Philippines is that, for example, you have a growth map or growth boundary plan for Cebu City. You need to coordinate with Mandaue City to the north and then Talisay City to the south. Like, how will people move in between Cebu, Talisay, Mandaue, and also, sorry, Lapu-Lapu? And then on the regional level, how will the new infrastructure um, facilitate access from Bohol, let's see here, Leyte, maybe Siquijor, and maybe also Dumaguete. So that's what it. That's like one consideration for development or sustainable development with regards to an urban growth boundary. So if you see here, that's region 6, where's region 7? So we have, this is an example of health facilities. We have Negros, but I just wanted to show a map of Region 7 that includes Negros Oriental, Cebu, Bohol, Siquijor. So that's Region 7. Sorry, it doesn't include Leyte. Leyte is like Eastern Visayas. Okay, continuing on. So there's a lot, this reading is very dense. I think it's worth our time to really go through it. Okay, so that's establishing boundaries. Oh, there's a few more, sorry. So the environmental factors mentioned in the third point present an especially significant concern in determining not only the amount of land required, but the location of future development. Approaches to defining lands not to be developed, basically lands to be preserved, are fully described in chapter 4, which is our next reading. These estimates and analytical procedures are usually employed in preparing comprehensive plans before there are familiar processes for most planning agencies. Drawing boundaries, however, is not a fail-safe procedure. For example, in Portland, Oregon, the regional agency the metro area discovered that during 2 decades, a substantial amount of residential development on large lots had occurred outside the edge of its urban growth boundary. Proposals to expand the boundary and extend urban services to potential development areas beyond the low-density settlements met with stiff opposition from residents. Boundary setting in Hagerstown in Washington County, Maryland, proved worthless. The boundary incorporated more land than could be developed in 50 or more years, and the line was so crudely drawn on the map that it covered several hundred feet of territory, making interpretation of its location almost impossible. So many areas within the boundary were not scheduled for sewer service, but some areas outside the boundary were already sewered. So this could be a very big issue. So I showed you before. So this is the current sort of CLUP in progress for Cebu City. So they divided Cebu City into one, two, three, four, five distinct areas. So we have the upland area, which includes the Central Cebu Protected Landscape, or the CCPL, in dark green. And then you have the uptown area, where we have like the high income residents, the midtown area, where you have the um, current CBD, and then you have the downtown heritage core, which is the original CBD, which is now also the heritage district of Cebu, and then a newer proposed downtown in SRP, or the South Road properties. So that includes SMC side, a few. Wait, is that correct? Let me just double check. Zooming in. Yeah, SMC side. We have Il Corso, so only commercial areas so far. I don't think there are any residential areas, or like significant residential areas here. So that's the goal, to like put the new housing here. In fact, I think there was a rendering for Waterfront Development Cebu. The reason why I wasn't able to prepare a slide again this week is there was another seminar this week, this time for waterfront development in the SRP area. They showed a video yesterday. I think the workshop, the seminar proper was last Thursday and Friday. So it should be out in the media now. Where did they put it? I think this one. So there should be, oops. There's no rendering, but the idea was somewhere here in the SRP, I think this part here, it's a body of water, but I think it's here, this area. I'll just highlight it on the screen. They're going to have, I think, new housing here. And also several parcels in the SRP will be allocated for new affordable housing. So this one highlighted here is kind of medium to high income housing, and then somewhere in the SRP, low to medium housing as well. Oh my gosh, we're just still in the one reading. Okay. Let's see. So sometimes when you have a growth boundary map, enforcing it could be another big problem. So political issues enter the process in determinations of types of future development that to be accommodated, the specific areas to be included within the boundary, and periodic reviews and revisions to the boundary are required. So densities of expected development, for example, can be influenced by public policies that encourage higher or lower numbers of dwelling units in certain areas, or favor development of intensive industrial development rather than low density business parks. So public policies may also or can encourage development in underutilized areas of existing development rather than promoting fringe area growth. So the determination of estimated densities, of course, should take into account the degree to which such policies can affect market forces. So another section here is the 2040 plan for the regional development adopted in 1994 by Metro Organization of Portland. So they started their plan in 1994. You could probably see, you could probably research on your own what's going on with Portland, Oregon today. Anyway, their plan for 2040 represented one of the most ambitious attempts to set public policy constraints on boundary changes. A major concern of the 50-year plan was to define the future boundary for regional development, which local planners believe would establish the basic urban form of Portland, Oregon. So planners evaluated 4 alternative concepts. One that assumed existing trends. The other is a more compact form. 3 is a highly concentrated form that assumed no expansion of the boundary. And 4, a plan that assumed that 1/3 of the future growth would take place in satellite cities. I'll skip a bit because we're running out of time. And then the existing boundary drawn in 1970s to accommodate 20 years growth expanded slightly during this period and will expand relatively moderately over the next 50 years of development. Market forces, of course, may not cooperate with these public policies. The 1981 Comprehensive Plan for Saratoga County, as an example, made only modest changes in the boundaries set in 1975. Planners proposed more intensive development, thus requiring less land for future development. The new plan included higher density centers and optional high density residential development areas. In fact, the analysis for the 1989 plan for Saratoga County found that development densities had decreased rather than increased, thus necessitating significant expansion of the boundary. So that's the figure here. Just finish this paragraph. Public officials had undercut their own density policy by consistently turning down higher density development proposals due to opposition by project neighbors with a "not in my backyard" attitude. So, if you're familiar with this term NIMBY, this is very popular not just in the U.S. but also in Australia, a lot of the English-speaking countries. So there's also the issue of social groups, basically kind of public groups, not really related to the government, but the residents themselves might turn down or form councils or committees that turn down new development. So if we look at the figure here for Saratoga County, in sort of flat gray, that's the urban area. With the hatching, the 45-degree hatching, that's semi-rural. And then in sort of darker gray, we have major deployment centers / interstate regional office parks. So these dark gray areas are parks. And then the sort of dotted hatch is the public conservation or preservation. And then the growth boundary is the broken line. Okay, so the proposed boundary changes in Saratoga County set up a storm of complaints by environmental groups and civic activists on occurrence in many communities that have established growth boundaries. So belaying Robert Frost's observation that good fences make good neighbors. Boundaries once set seem to generate conflict rather than resolve it. So they become political lightning rods for controversies over growth and development. So it's not all, what do you call this? Although urban growth boundaries is highly recommended by our readings, it's also not very easy to implement, and as well as similar to many other things in the built environment. There are several good ideas, but it's hard to implement or enforce these kinds of ideas. So developers in Portland, for example, claim that sites for business parks that would generate economic gains are becoming scarce. Home builders in Portland, Portland, Boulder, and other cities routinely complain that restrictions on land supply drive up housing prices. This is also being experienced in Sydney. So meanwhile, citizen activists and environmental groups concerned about the rate or amount of development consistently oppose boundary expansions. So citizens in Saratoga County petitioned in an initiative in 1990 calling for a 2-year moratorium or halt or stop on the development until a revised plan limiting boundary changes could be prepared, although defeated by a 3-to-1 vote. Community tension over the issue continues to this day. So San Diego's experience was even more dramatic. Its urban reserve was intended to be opened up for development as urbanizing areas became fully developed. Instead, the 12,000 acres took on a new meaning for many San Diego residents as the last vestige of a once plentiful open space in the city. After several attempts by developers to redesignate the area for development, a citizens' initiative was approved that requires a public vote on any change in the reserve. Meanwhile, development long ago jumped over the urban reserve to fuel growth in rapidly uh, rapidly growing communities in San Diego County. So what's going on here is that San Diego County identified a reserve. The citizens really wanted no develop. Oh, sorry. Um, okay, so sorry, I'm explain. So San Diego had a reserve that they wanted to open up for development. Citizens really didn't want the development to happen, so they created these sort of opposition groups. However, the developers already built anyway, so this could be a big controversy or issue. In Cebu, I don't think there's a lot of social groups that really oppose development. It's very, I would say, apathetic. The Cebuano citizens towards any large development. So this is a good news for developers, but maybe in the long run, not so good for the citizens. So I'll skip over legal concerns here. I'll just go directly to, since for the last 30 minutes, we need to talk about what do you call this? Protecting environmental and natural resources. Let me just review what other key features here. Service extensions, interlocal agreements, putting it together, the comprehensive plan for future development areas. So most of these sections here that I'm skipping over, they're more kind of narratives, not really steps to create the comprehensive plan. But basically, if I don't discuss it, very likely I won't include it in the exam. Okay, I'll just power through with chapter 4 over here of Porter. So where is that? Porter. Urban growth boundary. They have to move that to next week. Fortunately, so we have to start a bit earlier. Is it already the 20th? It's already the 20th next week. Where is my Kelly? Oh no, this is not Kelly, but Porter, chapter 4. Anyway, the conclusion of that managing community expansion for chapter 3, the one we were talking about for the last hour. So techniques that allow communities to manage the direction, quality, and pace of growth offer some of the most potent regulatory approaches in the arsenal of public policy affecting development. Growth boundaries and similar methods for determining the location of future development establish strong guidelines for development process, providing a framework for zoning and other regulatory actions as well for private development decisions. Similarly, local powers to control growth in developing areas outside existing jurisdictional boundaries are essential to managing community development. So without those powers, communities are unable to guide their destinies, quote unquote, and are vulnerable to potentially damaging effects of development decisions outside their control. In combination, as we see in the experience of Lincoln, Nebraska, which is probably a case study we skipped over, these growth management tools can provide highly effective approaches to responsible growth management. So the key thing here is there needs to be at least some understanding as to what are the natural resources that need to be protected. For Cebu City, I'll flash it again here. There is already a clearly defined protected landscape area, but we can see some encroaching happening here in the peri-urban area, this like light green area, if you can see where my mouse is. So the challenge will be how to manage growth there. And you see this red line here between the upland area and the peri-urban area. I think that would be a good location. Oh, sorry, I'll zoom in a bit more. Yeah. So the currently being decided upon urban growth limit for Cebu is along this broken line, this green broken line. That is, unfortunately, a low quality map. I'll try to trace this over with QGIS so I can show you next week. This looks to be just a bit, I really can't tell which part. This looks like Talamban area here. I'll put a barangay map next to it. Okay, let's download that really quickly. Media. Okay, and then I'll get this. Save as picture. Let's call this urban and this growth limit for Cebu. Growth limit Cebu. Let's go to downloads. Here's the city. I'll just use very quick Photoshop for this. Where did that file go? Just give me a second. Change this. Did my internet cut off? Okay, I'm still online. Change picture. Oh, it went to pictures. That's why. Okay, let's kind of get the same scale. Yep, that is. Let me reduce the opacity of it. So growth limit about the will hit around Barangay Talamban, Banilad, Apas, Lahug, Guadalupe, Tisa, and down to Bulacau in Cebu. So those barangays, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Excuse me, 11 barangays that will be affected by that growth boundary. And then I think the challenge here is if I go back to the map, let's just highlight Guadalupe, for example. Barangay. You can see how much is encroaching to the, what do you call this? Guadalupe, it's here. Like that's the edge of Guadalupe in the sort of estimated Wikipedia map of Guadalupe. And you can see there's development outside the boundary of Guadalupe here. You have Sitio Arcos, whatever Compono Regalo is. We have new subdivisions here, St. Martin Heights subdivision. So the proposed urban growth limit, this is as of, when was this proposed? Figure 14, Cebu City's proposed development areas. There's no year. I think it's within at least the last. I saw this in a presentation this year, so maybe they had this ready maybe 2 years ago. So let's say 2020, about 2020. So this growth boundary here is a bit more north compared to an older proposal. This isn't done by the local government. It's just done by, I think, one urban planner, one very loud environmental planner in Cebu, Ramon Sevilla, which I think some of you may know or may not like. So this one is even closer. I think this goes a bit more in the middle of the uptown area instead of the edge of the uptown area. So It's constantly it's a big issue to locate where should the limit be. But anyway, that's all we have for urban growth boundary today. So for the last 20 minutes, I'll very quickly go through, let's see here, protecting environmental and natural resources, where not to grow. So key highlights here, I think I'll just highlight instead of reading through the whole thing. So one of the key things I want to highlight are, let's see, the importance of federal laws. I don't think we need to talk so much about that. For our class here, where they talked in length, we have the agricultural lands report and the I'll show it to you. So basically, these two slides, the Philippine land use regulation, our discussion on that, and then the discussion on protecting prime agricultural land. So that should form our kanang legal basis for the, protecting or like defining environmental or natural resources. Some other things here, let's see. Okay, I think this one would be very useful for us. So how do you identify these resources? So the obvious first step in conserving environmental and natural resources is identifying what and where they are. Many local planning offices expend a considerable amount of time and effort to determine the location of and characteristics of specific resources in areas that might be affected by development. So very simply, by identifying, uh, zoom out, sorry. By identifying and evaluating resources, they help establish priorities for their conservation. In many cases, they employ a McHargian technique of overlaying resources maps to define areas that are of greatest value for natural conservation. So in addition, local planners may undertake a carrying capacity analysis, also a technique by McHarg, to determine areas such as floodplains, steep slopes, prime farmlands, etc., that should not be developed. Areas that may be developed with special care to avoid adverse impacts, and areas suitable for development. So the capabilities of underlying geology and soil conditions to sustain development are also evaluated, including acceptability for use of septic tanks. A carrying capacity analysis does not provide an absolute measure of land to be conserved, but can offer a useful initial definition of natural constraints and development. So two key things here. I want to highlight, my voice is dying. For the 2:30 class, let's start at around 3:30 so we can get more reading done. Let's see, we have so the first one to identify your where not to grow is having overlaying resource maps and also a carrying capacity analysis. It's not really shown here in this reading how to do these processes, but at least you know what they're called, so you can do some research on them. Okay, and then I'll skip to over here, federal and state planning efforts. So let me just quickly. After many days hearings, approval of state province. So we can compare the state level to maybe the provincial level. And the state level in the US more or less correlates to the provincial level in the Philippines. I'll just read this section down here. So after many meetings, discussions, and hearings, and approval by State and Senate General Assembly, the criteria were enacted into law by May 1986. So this is talking about criteria for identifying protected lands in, let's see, the new legislation created. This is for Maryland. Let's see. One of the most dramatic commitments came from Maryland, the state of Maryland, which enacted a series of initiatives in 1984, including the Cheapskate Bay Critical Law by the Maryland Natural Resource Code, annotated Section 1801. Okay. So what are these categories for land and standards of development? So they identified three for Maryland. So intensely developed areas where little natural habitat remained, in which local government should adopt strategies to lower pollution, uh, lower pollution loadings from newer development uses, as well as improve the quality of runoff water, encouraging retrofitting stormwater facilities and minimize impacts on habitat protection areas. Then you have limited development areas. So these are areas that are currently developed in low to moderate intensity uses and with public sewer and or water service, in which habitat protection areas should be preserved, wildlife corridor systems preserved or created, wooded areas preserved to maximum extent possible, impervious surface limited to 15% of developed site, and cluster development of housing is encouraged. So denser housing. And then we have resource conservation areas, mostly in natural in character, in which natural areas should be preserved and further developed. Further development of housing could occur at densities not exceeding 1 per 20 hectares. So that's times 4,000, 1 per 8,000 square meters. So that's very big. Although local governments could establish minimum lot sizes within the overall density limit, generally no new industrial or commercial development is permitted. So looking at going back again to the Cebu City sort of proposed CLUP, or just basically the beginnings of a CLUP. So the book, Porter Chapter 4, recommended 4 levels. So let's go to my we have intensely developed areas, limited development areas, and resource conservation areas. So I think Cebu is in a good position with these like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas. So definitely upland areas is your resource conservation areas. The peri-urban area, since there's already development going on, my idea or my own, certainly in my own opinion, they can keep the existing development so we don't cause a lot of trouble, but they should stop any new development occurring in the peri-urban area. And then in the uptown area, this would be limited. I would consider limited development areas. So what's already there we keep, but we don't add anymore. The Midtown area and the downtown Heritage Core and downtown CBD, this is what I would classify as a intensely developed area. So we should expect more growth here because this is really where the economic activities happen. And then this is how we, at least maybe in my opinion, in the long run, mitigate any more negative impacts from traffic congestion. Because like if we have more housing here, more jobs here, maybe more people will move to the midtown and downtown area. And for those who already live in the uptown and peri-urban areas, maybe they'll just stay where they are and look for jobs within that area. So that's basically my strategy as well for working in the University of San Carlos, mostly because it's my preference. I don't want to go into the city because traffic is just too bad. This also highlights a bit of transportation planning where when traffic gets really bad, there is a chance for people to there's a percentage of people that no longer want to travel because it's so inconvenient. We may be experiencing a bit of that in Cebu as well. But anyway, in connection to Chapter 4, this is one key thing I want to highlight. Intensely developed areas, I would classify that for Cebu downtown and midtown area. limited development areas that would be for Cebu Uptown, and then resource conservation areas that would be upland area and the peri-urban area. So that's basically how you apply it, chapter 4 through Cebu City. Okay, and the rest of this section, I think I'll review and then maybe I'll highlight next week. So we managed to do, let's see here. So we managed to really clearly identify growth boundaries. We still have like one more reading here. See there, vector. I think I'll review this and see if we can, if anything is like really valuable that we need to add. Next week, we'll talk about historical preservation, growth management and housing, regionalism, and growth management in Southeast Asia. I'll upload the readings tonight so you can review them next week. So you'll be basically just reviewing key concepts on Saturday next week before our exam. So hopefully, it was a bit messy this semester, but hopefully you got some key ideas. This PowerPoint, I think I already shared it with you. So it is my hope that you have a clear understanding of how urban planning and urban design is done in the Philippines, as well as the key issues that we need to tackle here in Cebu. I think someone raised their hand. There's a question here. Thank you. I was going to ask for organized list of yes, the list should be here, Tadrick. I'll send it to you now. So it's a bit better than what was left behind. So we have, I organized it by week. So week 1, week 2, with the names updated. So if you zoom in, I think I can zoom in. And I can't. That's basically the most zoom in I can do. So we have week 1, the CLUP guide. Week 2 would be the land resource management and the Senate policy brief. Then we took a couple of weeks off to study QGIS. Unfortunately, we couldn't develop it further because we had to catch up with a lot of concepts. So they have week 7, that's chapter 5 of Porter. And then the week 10 is when we were starting to catch up. So we talk about impact fees. These are 3 readings on impact fees, actually 4. This one I think is a duplicate. I don't know why there's a duplicate here. I think that's an error. Let me just clean this up. Yeah, this is from Joyce. I don't know, maybe Joyce tried to copy. Joyce, are you here, Joyce? Or maybe that's from a different class.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Is this Koan? Is it okay if I delete this? It says you're the owner, Manggod, of this Word document for impact fee logic.
Okay po, sir.
Ah?
Okay po, sir.
Okay. See. I'll just remove it so it looks cleaner. So we have 3 readings on impact fees. One reading for transfer of development rights, and then 1 reading for additional reading for growth boundaries. And then we have, for this week, we have the protecting environmental and natural resources. Okay, and then I will add the rest of the readings later tonight. So just come back here. I'll share the link with you guys. Basically, I'm looking for, if you see a bullet point in the reading, I'm most likely going to take that because these bullet points and these readings, they highlight what they call this processes, definitions, and also what they call the steps to make whatever they're talking about happen. So whether it be urban growth boundaries, what do you call this, natural reserves, or definitions of sprawl. If you see a bullet point, just review those because most likely I'll take questions from those as well. Okay, so with that, we have 5 minutes left. I'll prepare for the next class. Next class will meet at, let's just meet at, what's already at 2:30. Let's meet at 3:30 and then we'll end with 5:30. Okay, so thank you guys. I'll upload this recording as soon as it's done. And